Behind the iconic white mask of Queen Elizabeth I lay a carefully guarded secret. To the world, she was the Virgin Queen, radiant with porcelain skin and unshakable authority. But beneath that flawless facade was not decay, nor horror, but a woman marked by survival, her beauty reshaped by illness and her image reforged by power. She was not merely wearing makeup. She was wearing a symbol, one that would define an era. In October 1562, within the damp, flickering corridors of Hampton Court Palace, the air thickened with whispered prayers and the fevered dread of a dying court. Elizabeth, the young sun around which England orbited, was fading. Smallpox, one of the most feared diseases of the age, had come to claim her. For days, the kingdom held its breath, suspended between a living queen and a looming political void. She survived, but survival was a cruel mercy. When the fever broke and the bandages were removed, the woman who stared back from the mirror was forever changed. Smallpox had etched its mark upon her skin, leaving faint scars that threatened not only her confidence, but the very image of her authority. To modernize, they were signs of endurance. To Elizabeth, they were fractures in the illusion of divine perfection. In the 16th century, a monarch's face was not merely personal, it was political. Beauty signified divine favor, legitimacy, and stability. A blemished queen could be perceived as a weakened sovereign. In a world ruled by perception, her reflection became a matter of state. And so, Elizabeth made a choice. To rule a nation of men, she could no longer remain merely a woman of flesh. She had to become something more, an icon, a monument, an eternal symbol. This was the moment the woman gave way to the legend. She turned to the most powerful cosmetic of the Renaissance, Venetian ceruse. Crafted from white lead and vinegar, it created a luminous, porcelain finish prized by Europe's elite. Applied carefully, it concealed imperfections and projected an image of ageless majesty. It was more than makeup. It was political armor. Each stroke of the brush built a barrier between the queen and the world, a wall of perfection designed to silence doubt and command reverence. Beneath its pale glow, Elizabeth appeared untouched by time, a living embodiment of divine authority. Yet the cost was insidious. Prolonged use of lead-based cosmetics was toxic, gradually damaging the skin and weakening the body. Whether she fully understood the danger remains uncertain, but the illusion it provided was indispensable. To maintain her throne, she had to maintain the myth. From that day forward, the Virgin Queen ceased to be merely a woman. She became an idea, England's immortal sovereign, eternally youthful, untouchable, and divine. Behind the alabaster mask stood not a ghost, but a strategist. Not a victim, but a ruler who understood that power often depends on perception. And so, Elizabeth I ruled not only with intellect and iron will, but with an image so enduring that it transcended mortality itself. Because in the theater of monarchy, the greatest illusion was not deception, it was immortality. But immortality is never granted without a cost. What appears divine beneath candlelight is often forged in shadow. The legend had been born, but legends must be maintained, layer by fragile layer. And if you stood within the stillness of her private chamber, you would hear it, the faint whisper of a brush against skin, sealing perfection with poison. For every icon requires an alchemist, and every miracle demands a sacrifice. To the ambassadors and suitors who knelt before her, The queen's face was an ethereal marvel, a blinding expanse of flawless white that seemed to repel the touch of time itself. It was the face of eternity, the face of power, the face of a goddess. But this divine radiance was no miracle. It was an illusion forged in the crucible of Renaissance alchemy. The secret to her ageless beauty lay in a coveted cosmetic known as Venetian ceruse, the most fashionable foundation in the Western world, and one of the most dangerous. Prized by Europe's elite, it promised perfection. In truth, it concealed decay. Its recipe was deceptively simple: a lethal union of white lead and distilled vinegar, ground into a dense, creamy paste. When applied, it did not merely rest upon the skin. It fused with it, drying into a rigid, porcelain-like shell that erased every imperfection and buried the scars of the past beneath an illusion of immortality. But ceruse was a jealous creation. It demanded devotion and offered ruin in return. For hours, Elizabeth sat in stillness as her ladies-in-waiting painted on the legendary Mask of Youth. With each careful stroke, authority was restored and vulnerability concealed. Yet beneath that luminous surface, danger seeped silently inward. Lead, a known toxin, could gradually damage the skin and body when used over time. The very substance that created perfection also threatened it. As the ceruse dried, it left the skin beneath parched and fragile, prone to cracking and irritation. To maintain the illusion of flawlessness, thicker layers were applied, each new coat masking damage caused by the last. Thus began a relentless cycle: concealment breeding dependence, dependence deepening concealment. Here lies the queen's most haunting paradox. The cure became the catalyst. The more perfection she pursued, the more she needed the mask that created it. By the twilight of her reign, Elizabeth I had transformed herself into something beyond mortal flesh. Her image, pale, ageless, and untouchable, was no longer merely cosmetic. It was political theater, a carefully engineered symbol of divine authority in a world where perception was power. And you can almost imagine the silence of her private chambers, the faint scent of vinegar lingering in the air, the soft whisper of a brush against skin, the weight of a crown sustained by illusion. To the world, she was a goddess of marble, but behind closed doors stood a woman bound to her own legend, trapped not by vanity, but by the burden of immortality. The Mask of Youth was no longer a choice. It was her armor, her identity, her shroud. And, stroke by stroke, the queen became eternal. Yet eternity is a merciless illusion. Beneath the porcelain glow, something darker was awakening. The mask did not merely conceal the truth, it began to reshape it. Imagine standing before her, dazzled by radiance, unaware that beneath the alabaster perfection, decay had already taken root. For poison does not announce its arrival. It reveals itself slowly, beautifully, fatally. If the leaden mask was the fortress Elizabeth built to shield herself from the world, the cracks in that fortress began to reveal a far more unsettling truth. The decay was no longer confined to the surface. It was seeping inward, threatening to hollow the icon from within. To behold the queen was to witness a masterpiece of contradictions. Her lips, the very instruments that commanded armies and dictated law, were stained a vivid, unnatural crimson. This was not the bloom of vitality, but the mark of artifice. Renaissance cosmetics often relied on pigments derived from cinnabar, a mineral containing mercury, prized for its brilliance, yet shadowed by its potential danger. Whether applied sparingly or frequently, such substances reflected an era where beauty and toxicity were perilously intertwined. The Golden Queen shimmered in splendor, even as the risks of her own colors lingered beneath the surface. Yet it was when Elizabeth smiled that the true cost of luxury in the Tudor age emerged. Beneath the crimson lips lay teeth darkened by decay. Her well-documented fondness for sugar, then rarer and more precious than gold, had taken its toll. In an age without modern dentistry, sweetness often came at the price of pain. Ambassadors recorded the condition of her teeth, describing discoloration that made speech difficult in her later years. To modern eyes, it was a sign of neglect. To contemporaries, it was an unfortunate consequence of privilege. Legend even suggests that some courtiers imitated the queen's darkened teeth as a sign of loyalty and status. While historians debate the extent of this trend, the tale endures as a chilling reflection of absolute devotion, where fashion blurred into flattery and admiration edged toward the macabre. The physical toll did not end there. Years of illness, age, and cosmetic practices contributed to the thinning of Elizabeth's once famous flame-red hair. To preserve the image of eternal majesty, she adopted an array of elaborate wigs, symbols of power, authority, and theatrical grandeur. These towering creations transformed her into something more than mortal, reinforcing the carefully crafted mythology of the Virgin Queen. By the twilight of her reign, Elizabeth had become a living masterpiece of artifice and authority. A face of lead, lips of crimson, hair of fire, reborn in silk and wire. She was no longer merely a woman. She was an idea, a sovereign sculpted from illusion, discipline, and necessity. The queen who transformed England into a global power stood radiant before the world, unyielding, immaculate, and eternal. Yet, behind the wigs and porcelain skin, behind the symbols of divinity and dominion, lingered a quieter truth. The icon endured, but the woman beneath it was fading into legend. And when the legend eclipses the woman, reality becomes unbearable. The illusion had conquered courts and continents, but it could not silence the mirror. If you were forced to confront such a reflection, would you dare to look? Elizabeth chose another path. She banished the truth from sight. But even in darkness, the shadow remained. The twilight of her reign, the halls of Richmond Palace dissolved into a labyrinth of shadows. Elizabeth, the woman who had defeated the Spanish Armada and outmaneuvered the greatest minds of Europe, had finally encountered an enemy she could not command: time. As age and illness took their toll, the Queen issued a decree whispered through the corridors of power. Every mirror, every polished surface, every silvered glass was to be removed or covered. Whether born of vanity, fragility, or legend, the story endured, an enduring symbol of a monarch determined to control not only her image, but her reality. She could no longer bear to confront the erosion of the icon she had spent a lifetime constructing. For more than 40 years, the porcelain mask had been her armor. Now it had become her cage. In a world where perception was power, the illusion of perfection was not merely desirable, it was essential. If the reflection vanished, the myth could remain unbroken. Yet silence has a way of amplifying truth. Within the dim stillness of the palace, the absence of mirrors did not erase time. It only deepened its shadow. One enduring courtly tale speaks of a trusted attendant who, by accident, entered the Queen's private chambers before her morning preparations were complete. In the pale gray light of dawn, he glimpsed what few were ever permitted to see: the fragile woman behind the legend. Gone was the virgin queen in her fiery wigs and white-lead splendor. In her place stood a figure aged by time, her features unadorned, her mortality unmistakable. Whether fact or myth, the story reveals something far greater than physical decline. It reveals the cost of immortality. As the winter of 1603 descended upon England, Elizabeth entered her final act. She grew withdrawn, refusing comfort, sleep, and at times even food. Most strikingly, she resisted sitting, standing for hours in silent defiance, as though sheer will alone could hold the weight of empire upon her shoulders. She was no longer merely a sovereign. She was a monument sustained by determination. When the end came on March 24th, 1603, it arrived without spectacle, quiet, solemn, and inevitable. The woman who had presided over England's golden age passed into history, leaving behind not just a kingdom transformed, but an image that would endure for centuries. She had spent a lifetime crafting the face of a goddess. In doing so, she achieved the immortality she sought, not in flesh, but in legend. The golden age was crowned in white and crimson. The myth was sealed in memory. And Elizabeth I died as she had lived, a queen without equal, a symbol without reflection, a monument to the fragile, haunting cost of perfection. Thus the myth endured, untouched by time, yet stained by sacrifice. History would remember the goddess, not the woman, the mask, not the cost. And as you gaze upon her immortal portraits, frozen in radiant stillness, one question lingers in the silence of centuries. Was perfection her triumph or her undoing? The answer lies not in legend, but in the poison that preserved it. Elizabeth I achieved the immortality she so desperately sought, but it was a cold, metallic victory. Today, she remains suspended in time within her portraits as the Virgin Queen, a porcelain goddess untouched by age. Yet history reveals a more unsettling truth. This divine image was no miracle. It was a carefully engineered illusion, a mask of white lead and crimson pigment that preserved the icon while concealing the woman beneath. She did not merely wear the crown. She became the myth that sustained it. But Elizabeth's tragedy is not confined to the Tudor past. It lingers as a haunting mirror held up to our own world. Her story stands as a stark warning about the perilous collision between imperfect science and impossible standards of beauty. She commanded fleets and shaped empires, yet remained vulnerable to the silent tyranny of expectation, the demand to remain eternally flawless. Every era has its own Venetian ceruse. Every generation has its own illusion of perfection. And every time we chase beauty without questioning its cost, every time we sacrifice health at the altar of an artificial ideal, Elizabeth's ghost walks beside us. Her life leaves us with a final, chilling question that echoes across the centuries. What is the true cost of perfection? And if immortality demanded your reflection, would you dare to pay the price? She ruled an empire, but she could not rule her own reflection. In the end, the Golden Age was immortalized in paint and legend, purchased at the slow, relentless price of a woman who chose to become a monument. And monuments, unlike mortals, do not breathe. They only endure. And in their silence, they whisper a truth no mirror can conceal. Was the crown worth the mask? Subscribe to Dirty Royal Secrets as we continue to unearth the dark truths buried beneath the surface of history, where power seduces, beauty deceives, and immortality always demands its price.